I'm Beata Nowakowska, and this is Jim Benson. We're going to talk a little bit about limiting work in progress. So, Jim,
Yes.
I would like to hear some success stories from you. Because I come around many companies that do not limit work in progress. The developers there had like 5 or 6 projects, and it's just natural for them. So how would you start the change? On what would you start?
Well, the first thing that I do is try and figure out what the existing working process is, obviously, and then figure out what has led to that overload. So is it that they feel like the market needs something from them right away? Is it just simply enthusiasm? Or is it a lack of understanding about what people can handle? And as far as success stories, a recent client of mine, I went in and they had, like you said, about 5 or 6 projects per person. They were doing 1-month sprints, and those two things combined gave them very, very large batch sizes and way too much work to do. I simply suggested to them that if they did limit their projects in process, they would actually finish things. Gave them a little bit of a speech about why that would happen, and then I left. And I'll be quite frank that I was surprised that they really did it. But when they really did it, a couple of things happened almost immediately. Is that the individual contributors trusted them a lot more. So it was an immediate statement by management that we understand that the company has capacity, and we understand that you're professionals, and if we treat you well, things will go better. But in that case, the only way that happened was because of upper management buy-in. There are sneaky ways to limit your work in process, but if you can't limit the portfolio, those become band-aids more than they become actual systemic solutions.
Okay, so this is a success story. How much did it took them?
This is the thing that's more incredible, is it took them a month.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that was that was my response too. I was like, "You're lying," and they said, "No, we're not lying." And I said, "Can you prove it to me?" And then they did, and I was. To this day, I still look like this. I'm still blown away by that. So usually what happens is, like I said in my second story, where you have to create some system to visualize the impacts of the overload, of the overload of the work. And so what we'll do with that is we will actually have charts and graphs or just one board that shows everything that everybody's working on, that shows how many things are in flight and the impact of those, whether it's a delay impact or it's a defect impact or it's a job satisfaction impact. Those are usually very easy to calculate and therefore very easy to visualize. What you don't want to do is say, I went to see Jim Benson speak and now we have to limit our WIP, because people will say, I didn't go see Jim Benson speak, and no, we don't. So you need to build a case to do that, and usually that's best done by visualizing the problem and then calculating the impacts.
Okay, so let's say that the people work remotely. They are from 500 countries. We have testing in Poland, developing in Germany, let's say, and security in India.
Yep. Yep. So I love that example because it has nothing to do with the locations. It has everything to do with the siloing of work. If you had a developer and a UX person and a security person in each place, and a QA person in each place, then you would have teams that could work collaboratively, build trust, and finish things quickly. What's happening now is you've built silos where the handoffs aren't just from person to person, but they're from function to function. That's a lot harder to work with. So the first thing that we will do in a situation like that is we will try and create cross-functional teams despite those boundaries. So it's no longer you are a QA person, but you are a QA person on the blue team, or you're the QA person on the Jake and Elwood team, or whatever that might be. And those teams then should collaboratively do work as much as possible. So it shouldn't be like it flows from Warsaw to Germany to Bangalore, but it should be the work flows within this team, and those people are communicating all the time. One of the ways we do that is we say you can't, as a developer, you can't start something unless you have a dedicated UX and QA person to start it with you, so that the wall disappears. So just like it was a lot easier to go shopping in Berlin after the wall came down, it's a lot easier to collaborate when you knock those silo walls down. So your problem, as you described it, wasn't necessarily a distributed team, it was a distributed function problem.
But what if you don't have QA and the developers at the same locations? In Poland, it's quite common that you have development here and QA in India.
Well, the same thing. Whether they're next to you or not, you need to operate as a team, because any software development enterprise or endeavor that puts quality at the end will have quality problems, period. So if you develop before you've consulted with a QA person, then you've written some code, but you haven't actually developed software. So it may be very tricky to figure out how to say, all right, I've got my two developers in Krakow, and I've got my two QA people in Chennai. How do I get them to communicate up front? And what work can they handle without communicating, and what work can they handle with a degree of communication? So what I would recommend is that anybody who operates a distributed team first watch one of Dave Snowden's Cynefin complexity videos and ask yourself, is the work that we're doing simple so anybody can do it? Is it complicated so that we need to have a little bit of a conversation? Or is it complex where we need to have a lot of conversation?
Okay, so how do you show people how to work together? How should they work together when they are remotely?
Mm-hmm. So the first thing that we do is we have people draw up for each project a project charter, a very simple project charter. And it's not the project manager doing that. It's not the Scrum Master doing that. It's not the product owner. It's the team doing it. And what we do is we have them define the vision of the project, the expectations for themselves or others, when it's necessary to communicate with other people, and what the victory conditions look like. And we have people do that using Post-it notes, or if they're super distributed, virtual Post-it notes. But you see what each of the team members believe the project is, and then you normalize that. Because that's a big problem, is you start a project and everybody thinks that the project is something slightly different, and then you wonder why you have problems in handoffs. Okay. The second thing we do is we set up a communication plan that says, which operates the same way. People do it with Post-it notes. It's the team building it. But they say, here are the things we're going to communicate. Here's how we're going to communicate them. Here's the technologies we're going to use. So it won't be like, did you get my meeting invite? Well, where was it? Well, it was in Slack. Well, I thought it was going to come from Google Docs or whatever, or from my calendar. And then, obviously, because we do Kanban-y things, we visualize the work in the Kanban and then make sure that everybody looks at the Kanban every day and pays attention to the work that's going on. And that one key thing is that you have no tolerance for confusion. So if you ever feel even slightly uncomfortable with something, talk to somebody about it.
But each company that I met that had this problem with limiting work in progress with 5 or 6 projects at once had such huge problem with not communicating their confusion, because they are not used to be in the team and being open. So for me, it's not enough to tell them communicate every confusion. So what more can I do to make them really communicate their confusion?
So let's suppose that these people don't communicate very well, and they're working on this project and they're not communicating very well, and they're on a company retreat and they're still not communicating very well, and then there's a big flood. And the big flood comes and it destroys the building, and everybody's clinging to the side of a ledge and they have to get off the ledge. Those people will communicate very well then. So there's a couple of things that happens. One is that when we do projects, we make them so big that nobody has any clarity about what they're supposed to do and when. If we can make projects smaller and smaller and smaller, then it becomes very easy to collaborate, because the deliverable is 5 minutes from now or 2 days from now, and not 6 or 8 months. There isn't time to put up with that. So what's interesting is, rather than creating false deadlines like we do in Scrum, where we say, okay, every 2 weeks we just have this arbitrary deadline, what we try and do instead is say, okay, rather than projects, we're going to have a strategic intent. So these 3 months, we're going to be focused on making the UI really great. We're going to have another strategic intent to say we're going to make it easier for customers to make transactions. And then the third one might be we're going to fix certain things in the database. And so those are like the 3 big labeled strategic intents. Then we say to the team, if you were to satisfy this strategic intent right now, how would you do that? And they're going to come up with a set of ideas. And those ideas are usually things that would be components for a project. And what we'll do is we'll call those big bets and small bets. Because if there's a project and you're a project manager, you try and make the project as big as possible, because that's how you get your power. If I call something a bet, all of a sudden you're like, I don't feel comfortable betting that much. And so the projects become smaller and smaller, the problem statements become more focused, and the ability to collaborate shoots through the roof, because you feel comfortable, because you don't feel stupid asking for help. And the deadlines or the ends of the projects are so short that it becomes trivial, basically, to ask for help. So I'll just stop there, because I've talked too much.
Okay. So one more subject that I wanted to address, slack time. If you want to have really small WIP, you need to tolerate some slack time. Yes. So how do you convince people to tolerate slack time?
Usually through stupid analogies. So if you tell people your workers are human beings and they need to recharge, and if you keep them busy all the time, you'll just burn them out, that tends not to work. It's 100% true, but it tends not to work. But if you say to people things like, if I wanted to go from here to Krakow and I had all the people in this building to move, and I had one Mazda Miata, trying to smash them all into one Mazda Miata for the drive is just not going to work. So it's better to actually, if that's our only way of doing it, to shuttle people back and forth. And even though the people here are slack, they're better protected by not all piling onto the top of the car. The key here is that as we move into lean systems, we don't go from a resource utilization model where we try and keep everybody busy all the time. We move to an availability model, which means when you need somebody, are they available? In the resource utilization model, which is the one I kind of talked about earlier, where I said, if you have a bunch of developers and they develop and you have one QA person, so you have like 11 million developers and one QA, you can develop all the software you want, it's still not going to be released because the system won't allow it. The system would actually be released a lot faster if almost all of those developers didn't do anything at all, and the few that could develop, giving one QA person actually did. So figure out where the bottlenecks in your system are that are stopping you from releasing software, and then time people's actions according to that, not according to how busy you want them to look.
Okay, so the last question: how do you convince yourself to allow yourself for the slack time?
Stop seeing through me. Thankfully, my travel builds in some slack time for me. So I can, sometimes of course it's slack time in airports, which is less than ideal. But for example, a couple of weeks ago, I had a project in Bergen, Norway. And Norway is just gorgeous, and the food is wonderful. So I said, okay, I have a friend in northern Norway, and I haven't been there before. Can he and I devise some excuse so that I can work for a little bit while I'm there, and then spend the rest of the time with slack time? So what I do is I invent little excuses, but I try and make sure that I have that. And the other thing that I've tried to make sure recently is that urgent things tend to destroy your ability to do important things. And so I've built a Kanban that just has habits. So participate in social media for a few hours each day, make sure that I do a little bit of business development, make sure that I spend a little bit of time meditating, and those tickets need to move. And sometimes they move and sometimes they don't, but I can take notes in those tickets, and I can watch how my slack time is able to impact my ability to do quality work.
Thank you very much.